Right. Good evening. Greetings from New Delhi, India. It's a pleasure to be on this show on this very important G20 summit in Rio at a very critical juncture in the geopolitics and geoeconomics. I think the focus of President Lula is very important in today's juncture, which is about poverty elevation and removing inequality. I think that was a very bold and a unique move, and this has been his philosophy. I mean, his the philosophy of his life. You know, how to address inequality. This is his belief. His based on his lifelong struggle against removing inequality, giving people a better life. And I think that was his motto. I mean, in his primary goal in this G20, and I think he's been quite successful in that. But we have to see how this the proposal for global wealth tax is accepted by the developed countries or by the rich countries, by the OECD countries, to put it precisely. We don't know how they are. React, I mean, how would they react, and whether we can G20 actually can, because G20 is not an executive body. It doesn't have a secretariat. Whether it can implement that, which means all the G20 members have to implement that. So if you look at G20, it's almost a vertical divide between members who are members of G7 and EU, and the rest are all countries of the global south. So, the countries of the global south, of course, has been disadvantaged for decades. And how these developed countries react to this proposal for global wealth tax, I'm not very certain at this stage how would they react. But definitely, it's a very bold move, and I think President Lula has kind of shaped this G20 based on his philosophy. It's philosophy based on which he has delivered for Brazilian economy, even in first two terms,
Yes.
and he is
Well,
trying to
sir,
give a better life
can
to
you
the.
highlight the most pressing economic challenges that the G20 is trying to address this year, especially that you've mentioned they're not an executive body, and how realistic really are the proposed solutions?
I think if, like in 2008, I mean, after the 2000, G20 came into being after the 2008 crisis, right? So, there is a crisis which has been created by COVID, firstly, which has impacted the global economy, and then the two conflicts, the Ukraine conflict and also the conflict in West Asia. That has also impacted the global economies because the supply chains have got disrupted. So, in these circumstances, there have been rising inequality in various countries, in various developing countries, countries which were about to attain from a least developed status to developing status. They have been impacted very badly in South Asia and elsewhere, and they really need a kind of guidance in this area, how to pull out of this kind of situation which was created by COVID, and that has impacted jobs of millions of people, and countries have gone into debt because of that. So I think the onus is on G20 countries in both the developed as well as the emerging economies to hammer out a formula which can be then universally accepted in addressing the matter of inequality.
So, now the climate finance pledges and proposed mechanisms, do you think that they're adequate enough to meet the needs of the developing nations?
Not yet. I think these are not yet enough. The developed countries, the industrialized countries have to do more than the developing countries, because they have been creating this crisis for decades, actually. They are industrialized much before the developing countries have become industrialized. And still, emerging economies are still not as industrialized as the developed countries. So I think the onus is largely on them, and they should create have more arrange more finances for mitigating climate impact.
Well, in regards to the global alliance against hunger and poverty, what potential do
Hmm.
you think it has to reduce global inequality, as you've mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's a very novel proposal, and if countries can take inspiration from that, and this is the guiding principle essentially. So if and if you notice that G20 presidency has now been in emerging economies, Indonesia followed by uh, India, and then Brazil, and then it passed on to South Africa.
Hmm.
These are big economies. These are developing economies. These are now emerging economies. As and all incidentally, three of them are members of BRICS. And Indonesia is a BRICS partner, like Egypt is a member of the BRICS. And I think they can, if these countries can move something, so G20 cannot make it binding on countries. But then if countries can put together, there is some formula which is, and that is being implemented by various countries, member states of G20. I think to a large extent, this issue of joblessness, inequality, which has been caused, in my personal opinion,
Yes.
COVID-19 played a very big impact on this, particularly on some of these smaller economies which
Hmm.
were doing reasonably well around that time. And the
Yes.
impact was not felt immediately. Impact was felt after 3 years.